A huge economic emergency is breaking out all over Europe, and the stink is coming from London operative George Soros. On January 7th at 7:44 a.m., Ukraine's government-run gas company, Naftogaz, cut off the fourth and final Gazprom pipeline to Europe, adding Austria, the Czech Republic, Romania, and Slovakia to the growing list of countries now with limited to no gas supplies left to brave the winter. Earlier, the Ukrainian government had cut off 3 other natural gas pipelines, supplying gas to Hungary, Serbia, Macedonia, Croatia, Bulgaria, Turkey, Greece, and Bosnia, and leaving strained supply lines in Italy, in Poland, France, and Slovenia. Now, in conversations with Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin, Alexei Miller, the CEO of Gazprom, laid the blame of the current gas cutoff squarely on the Ukrainian government. LaRouche stated yesterday that we must look towards Soros's manipulations of the Ukrainian government for the real cause of the current crisis. After all, it was George Soros who in 2004 had orchestrated the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, ushering in the current government, factionally split between President Viktor Yushchenko and Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko. Since then, relations between Ukraine and Russia have been tense, and the continuing economic disintegration has plunged the nation even further into a crisis. Now, in October of 2008, Russian Prime Minister Putin had met with Ukrainian Prime Minister Tymoshenko to negotiate a gas contract where Russia would receive no increase in transit fees, Ukraine would pay below market price for gas, and would pay back their gas bills in full by the 31st of December. However, with the economic collapse destroying the real sector, Ukraine's steel and chemical exports, which account for the majority of productivity and jobs in the eastern part of the country, collapsed. Top economist and political activist Sergei Glazyev said on November 11th at a conference in Kyiv that the Ukrainian steel industry had essentially shut down for the long term. Now, in the midst of all of this, following talks between Tymoshenko and Soros, Ukraine's currency, the hryvnia, plummeted, forcing the nation to go to the IMF for a $16.5 billion loan, under one condition: that they hire the Soros-allied Blackstone Group to advise them on how exactly to spend the IMF money. Immediately following, in November, Naftogaz began charging Ukrainian customers $320 per 1,000 cubic meters, or nearly 60% more than the $201 it was offering to pay Gazprom in 2009. Still, despite these rates, come December 31st, Russia had received no payment on the gas contract from the Ukrainian government. The crisis began to escalate further following the first of the year, when Russia, panicked by the economic collapse, which was now hitting them and their raw materials export industries, their main source of revenue, ordered Gazprom to cut off natural gas supplies to Ukraine, following several more failed attempts by the Ukrainian government to honor the gas contract. Several days later, the Ukrainian government essentially began to run a blackmail operation, cutting off pipelines and diverting gas which was en route to Europe, holding a growing list of European countries hostage in retaliation. Now, the question we must ask now is whether the Russians made a mistake in the way they handled the gas situation. Though it is true that the Soros-manipulated government of Ukraine essentially cheated Russia, the Russians do have a legitimate reason to complain. The current situation represents a threat to peace in the region and is far too dangerous to be aggravated any further. LaRouche stated today that we must work to get an agreement on this crisis. The two nations should settle a gas contract. They should cut out the irregularities and commit to peace. If certain sensible parties, such as France, come into play and help Ukraine and Russia come into agreement on this, we can get the situation under control. Now, several talks have been held over the last few days, including a recent telephone conversation between Russian President Medvedev and President Yushchenko of Ukraine. Medvedev outlined the steps needed to be taken to resolve the crisis and urged Yushchenko to act swiftly in order to reach the necessary agreements and quickly resume the transfer of Russian gas to European consumers. The developing situation around Ukraine does not merely represent some political game between Russia and Ukraine, but is a reflection of a worldwide existential crisis, which can only be seen in the context of the continuing series of global destabilizations and chaos operations launched by the British, from the Mumbai massacre to the atrocities in Israel and Gaza in the last few days, in their all-out attempt to spark World War III before the inauguration of incoming U.S. President-elect Barack Obama. Now, with most of this area of Eastern Europe facing an excessively cold and brutal winter, and the crisis reverberating across the continent, millions of people are confronting unbearable conditions. Lyndon LaRouche stated yesterday, "If Europeans freeze to death now, you can thank George Soros for that. He's just going back to his work for Adolf Hitler in 1944. We should make sure that responsible parties come together and do everything possible to get this situation under control and to commit to implementing Lyndon LaRouche's Four Powers Agreement as a solution to the current economic crisis."